Louisiana.
And thanks, Madam Speaker. Also ask unanimous consent to revise and extend remarks.
Without objection.
Appreciate it. With that, be happy to yield to my friend, the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Hoyer.
Scalise, the Republican whip from Louisiana. On Monday, the House will meet at 12 p.m., Madam Speaker, for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. The House will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business today. The House will consider a resolution from the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th, recommending the House ask the Justice Department to charge Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino, Jr. with criminal contempt of Congress for refusing to testify about their actions and knowledge relating to the violent efforts to prevent the certification of the 2020 election. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the House may consider legislation related to COVID-19 pandemic. Additional legislative items are possible, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Thank the gentleman. As we look at the schedule for next week, obviously a lot of concerns about the continuing rising price of gasoline that we've been seeing for the last year and a half. President Biden talked about some things that he will do. Clearly, some of the long-term fixes to lower gas prices that have been filed. One of the bills I know I've mentioned to the Majority Leader in the past, H.R. 6858, is one of the bills that would address some of the real impediments to getting more oil and gas production here in the United States. There are a number of other bills, 6 different bills that were filed by the Natural Resources Committee recently that would address some of the other specific challenges that are holding back the ability for America to produce more oil and gas. I would ask the gentleman if we could get those bills on the calendar so that we can move to actually address the problems that are holding back American oil and gas production, thus leading to higher prices, and I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for that question, and I've been thinking about that because he asks that regularly. I particularly have been thinking about that question in the context of the fact that we have so much available acreage on which to produce oil and gas currently permitted. And when I say number, we're talking about literally millions of acres. There are 9,000, I tell my friend, Madam Speaker, 9,000 unused, approved permits right now. There are 26 million acres of public land available right now. There are 11 million acres of federal waters available. 37 million acres in total. In addition to that, last fall, 80 million acres, that was 37 million, so 80 million acres in the Gulf were put up for auction last fall, 2021, under President Biden, which was the largest lease sale in U.S. history. Unfortunately, the private sector bought only 1.7 million acres out of 80 million. So that, frankly, it appears to be no matter what we pass, no matter how many permits we make available, there is not an appetite in the private sector for producing more. I say that in the context of the producers, to their credit, in terms of they're claiming victory. They're claiming victory at the extraordinary profits that they have gotten. They're buying back stocks. They're paying large dividends, but they're not producing more product. Now, it may well be that they think the price is pretty high and they're making a good profit and they don't need to do anything more. But the gentleman's questions, Madam Speaker, continually imply that there is some impediment to producing more product. Now, of course, the United States is the largest producer of oil and of natural gas in the world. And we have increased very substantially over the past few years production. So that I want to say to the gentleman, the committees are looking at the bills the gentleman refers to, but in terms of production, the United States is producing 18.61 billion barrels per day, which is 20% of the world's production. The president, just the other day, is releasing 1 million barrels a day from the SPRO, from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's going to be 180 billion barrels over the next 6 months. In fact, when he did that, I don't know whether that had a direct impact, but as the gentleman knows, the price on the global market has come down. I think it came down $7 in the last month, or $7 in the last week. So that clearly the administration is making some substantial policy changes, one of which is use it or lose it. I said there were 9,000 permitted, ready to go, ready to drill right now, today. And the President has said in his policies, look, we've given all these permits. If you're not going to use these permits, then you're either going to pay a fee or you're going to give them back, and we're going to ask other people who want to produce more product. You would think in a capitalist system, which we have, which I strongly, strongly support, that given the price of oil being so high, that people would look for more product, unless they wanted to limit the availability of product and therefore keep the price even higher. I don't know which is the option there, but I will tell the gentleman that the President has activated the Defense Production Act, looking for critical materials, not just oil, but lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite, manganese, for all sorts of things that we need. So the President is taking very, very strong steps. In addition to that, which is very important, Madam Speaker, in addition to that, what we've done is pass legislation which will, in the relatively near term, not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, make us less and less reliant on overseas suppliers of energy that clearly have shown themselves to be not reliable, and clearly have been seen to be people who want to create a monopoly, a cartel, so that they can keep prices unusually high, and of course, in the process, continue to assault the environment and damage the climate of this global community, which will have an extraordinary cost. So in answer to the gentleman's question, the committees are looking at those bills that you mentioned. I will mention to them again, looking at those bills, but very frankly, any implication that we are not producing more product because there is some constraint by the federal government on production is simply not accurate, Madam Speaker. Again, 9,000 leases, 37 million acres available, 26 million on land, on public lands, permitted, ready to go. They have not been drilled on. And the President is saying,
the gentleman yield?
if you, I'll end now, if you don't drill, if you're not going to produce more product, we want more product, we need more product in the short term. If you don't want to produce it, then we're going to give those leases to somebody else. I yield to my friend.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. A number of problems with the way that the President's plan was described is that that is not what the President has done. The President has worked aggressively through many of his federal agencies to, in fact, block the production of oil and gas. And let me bring you back to candidate Barack Obama. There's a number of specific examples I'm going to give the gentleman, because the gentleman gave a number of specific examples that just don't comply with the facts, starting with the 9,000 leases, the thousands of acres that I know the President's talked about, others have talked about, that frankly don't tell the picture of what the President's also doing to ensure that you cannot develop on those lands. You cannot develop with those 9,000 leases. And I'll go back to candidate Joe Biden. This is what Joe Biden said when he was a candidate for president. And I quote, "No more drilling on federal lands. No more drilling, including offshore. No ability for the oil and gas industry to continue to drill, period. It ends." That was Joe Biden as a candidate. The problem is he continued to take steps to carry through on that.
Yeah.
And starting with the 9,000 leases. And if you have a lease to drill, it sounds really good until you realize that you still have to go through other steps to develop that. First of all, in some cases, you may actually go test wells, and you find out that they're not producing. Thousands, by the way, of those in the 9,000 are not producing wells, meaning they're dry holes. There is no oil. Now, I don't know if you're going to find a company because they're not drilling in an area where there is no oil, but maybe that's what the president's talking about, or maybe he doesn't understand the process of drilling for oil. So then you go to some of the other areas, and I'll give you Section 1002 of ANWR as an example. There needs to be seismic development where you go and test to see where the oil is. We have a lot of advanced technology where in the past they might drill even more dry holes. Today you can actually go and develop through seismic technology to know pretty well where the oil is, where the biggest reserves are, and then that's where you go and drill. And so the federal agencies are blocking the ability to do seismic activity, so you can't find out what is under the ground. So great, you've got a permit, you can't find out the seismic because the Biden administration is blocking it, so you can't make the multi-billion-dollar investment because you don't know what's under the ground where. In other countries, they allow that to happen. These companies are making investment, by the way. They're just not making the investment in America because they can't get cooperation from the regulating agencies because the regulating agencies don't want them to drill. Because again, President Joe Biden as a candidate said, there will be no more drilling, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period, it ends. And then he directed his agencies to do it. Another example that has been brought up just the other day, less than a week ago. Again, we're talking about prices hovering in the $100 range. Rating in the short term, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve actually makes our country less safe because SPRO is there to be a safety net. If there's a national crisis somewhere, you can rely on SPRO to get you through the next few weeks while you're working on a supply chain issue. That's not what's going on. The president's just rating SPRO to try to cover up for his failed policy. And so if you look at what he just did the other day, President Biden's Securities and Exchange Commission just put out a whole new set of rules and regulations to make it hard, not just for oil and gas companies, but any other company to use fossil fuels. Again, he's talked about this publicly. He wants to move away from fossil fuels. The problem is he's telling his regulatory agencies to go make it incredibly difficult and more expensive to use fossil fuels. In his budget just earlier this week, he proposed $45 billion in new taxes on oil and gas in America. Now, I know he's been in the past begging Putin to produce more. He's begging Venezuela, other dictators, Iran to produce more oil. He's not proposing to raise their taxes. He's proposing to raise the taxes on oil and gas produced in America to the tune of $45 billion in his budget he just released Monday. That would mean higher gas prices. But what it also does is it tells the oil and gas companies, don't drill in America because that's what President Biden as a candidate said. No more drilling, period. It ends. Then the SEC continued to do other things, this ESG movement, where they're trying to get the big oil and gas companies to not drill for oil. So you're an oil and gas company, you're Exxon, and they're pushing to try to get those companies to separate into two different entities so that they can cut off financing for oil and gas development projects. They're doing it right now. We've got a number of bills to fix this. And as the gentleman talks about, we want to do these things, we want to open it up, except if you're saying on one hand, I'm going to build this road, and I don't know why you're not driving down the road, but on the other hand, you've got people barricading the road, and then you say, look, nobody's using the road, so why even bother? Fine them for not using the road. And then you go look at the on-ramp, and you find out that they've put 10 barricades in front of the on-ramp so you can't get on the road. That's what President Biden has done to oil and gas drilling in America. He's actually failed to comply with the law on the requirements that he conduct lease sales, that he's not conducted, which the law requires him to do. There are actually lawsuits that we've won in court, and he continues to obfuscate those laws. So there's a bill called the Restore Onshore Energy Production Act. It immediately resumes oil and gas lease sales and requires quarterly lease sales in each state with an oil and gas program. That's something the president should be doing. If he wanted to actually lower cost of gasoline and produce in America, he would be doing, but he won't do it. So this bill would require him to do it. I would love us to bring that bill up. And again, if the gentleman says, hey, why don't we produce on those 9,000 leases, this would actually help the ones that aren't dry holes, where companies are trying to find out how they can go and drill, but they're being blocked by President Biden's different regulatory agencies. This would remove some of those roadblocks. The Strategy to Secure Offshore Energy Act would actually require the publication of the 5-year plan for offshore oil and gas lease sales and require timelines for developing subsequent leasing plans. That's supposed to be done under law. The president's not doing it. This would require he do it. The Energy Permitting Certainty Act requires Department of Interior to process applications for permits to drill under a valid lease regardless of any unrelated civil actions, where some of these groups use other laws like the Endangered Species Act to block drilling. Again, saying there's leases, why aren't you using them? President Biden's saying we're going to fine you for not using them, as he's using his other agencies to stop them from using the leases. So you've got EPA over here, you've got the Department of Interior over there, you've got the SEC over there, all putting up roadblocks to the roadway. And then the president says, look, there's no cars on the road, we're going to fine you for not using the road. Well, how about you take the roadblocks off the on-ramp so that you can actually get on the road and drill? President Biden is trying to have it both ways. He's trying to appease the people who he promised, I'm going to shut down drilling. Unfortunately, he is doing that, but then he's going and telling the public, I want them to drill, and in fact, I'm going to fine them if they don't drill, while he's stopping them from drilling. Again, other bills that we have to fix these problems that President Biden is putting up as roadblocks. The Securing American Energy and Investing in Reliancy Act requires the Department of Interior to conduct all remaining offshore and oil and gas leases in the current leasing plan and issue the leases won as a result of lease sales 257. Additional impediments he's put in front of people that have already followed the rules, but he's still not letting them actually go do what they want to do. They want to drill in America, and he's forcing them out of America. That's why he's begging foreign countries when he himself can remove the roadblocks that he put in place to stop drilling in America. And there are more bills. There's a number of other bills. We'll be happy to go over each of them with you. But what we're asking is, there are very specific things President Biden's done to impede the ability for us to drill in America. There are companies all across this country that know how to drill and can't drill in America. And instead of the president trying to use taglines and divert and talk about Putin and everybody else, when he's the one that's given Putin leverage by shutting America off. And again, this isn't accidental. He, as a candidate, said, no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling, including offshore, no ability for the oil and gas industry to continue to drill, period. It ends. Unfortunately, it has ended, and we're trying to get it started up again by reversing the very things Joe Biden did to stop it. And we're asking for help here on this floor to address these very specific problems, and I would yield.
Well, I'm not surprised that the gentleman and many of the bills that he refers to want to undermine the regulation to protect the health and welfare of the American people, which those are designed to do, and most of which I think your side of the aisle did not support or enforce when you were in charge of the presidency. Madam Speaker, all of that rhetoric about the president doesn't want to do this, doesn't want to do this, 80 million acres, 1.7 million acres bid on. If, in fact, people were looking for additional ways and means to produce, the fact at a price that is historic, they would do so. And he dismisses, Madam Speaker, the 9,000 leases that exist. Now, maybe his
For correction, that is not what I did. I actually went through how those 9,000 leases are being blocked by the president from being utilized properly.
Yes. If, in fact, that was the reason for non-production, we all would have heard of the fact that we're not producing, and the stock market would have heard about that, and the companies would be lamenting the fact that they're not producing more. In fact, when you read their reports, they're indicating we're making very high profits, we're not putting money into production at this point in time, and we are buying back stocks, and we are paying high dividends. I do not criticize them for making what is a business decision. That business decision, however, has had an adverse effect. Why? Because we are not moving quickly enough to not be reliant on fossil fuels, which the president, in his remarks, wants to get to. We have a disagreement between our parties, Madam Speaker, on that issue. Drill, baby, drill. That has been the mantra forever. And it was 73 degrees yesterday. And our planet is hurting. The trees on my property produce blossoms long before they usually do. They're confused. But not only are they confused, it is dangerous for agriculture. It's dangerous for human beings. It's dangerous for animal life. It's dangerous for our seas. And we have a difference of opinion. That's what the president was speaking to, that we need to move towards that end. But he understands, as we all understand, that fossil fuels are necessary right now. Natural gas is right. We're the biggest producer of natural gas in the world. We're the biggest producer of oil in the world. That hasn't stopped. And yes, we need to get to, as our Build Back Better bill does, that none of you voted for, it gets to a reliance on fuel that will not help Putin. Now, there's some people in your party who apparently think Putin is a pretty good guy, he's a genius, he's this, that, and the other. We don't think so. We think he's a war criminal. And we think there's some other folks who are providing us with oil on whom we ought not to rely. Not only for the global health, but also for our national security. And to the extent that we invest in alternatives, which, by the way, every energy company in America, and I think the world probably, I'm not going to say that, but in America, that I've talked to, wants to do, who are all doing research on alternative energy sources because they know that at some point we need to get off of a reliance on fossil fuel. That's what the president was speaking about. But he put 80 million acres in the Gulf for lease. Well, why would anybody put 80 million if they were no more release, no more drilling? He put 80 million acres and only 1.7 million the private sector even sort of nodded at. Before any test, before any knowledge, you know, they need the lease to test it. So I say to my friend, we're going to need fossil fuel. And we need to bring gasoline prices down. But very frankly, you're not going to bring prices down if we don't produce more product, and the focus is not higher profits, buying back stock, and making high dividends. There's no incentive to do that. We need to do it. I hope, I've urged the president to talk to the leaders of the energy companies in our country. They're part of the success of America. And we're at war. We're at war with Putin, a war criminal, a tyrant. And that has destabilized world markets. And in the last month, up $1. That's Putin's dollar we're paying. We're paying that dollar because of Putin. You mentioned Putin as an aside, Madam Speaker, the whip did. Just as an aside, as if the contemplation, as the President pointed out, Madam Speaker, that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Even Mr. Zelensky thought, maybe you're overstating the case. An extraordinarily courageous leader in Ukraine. So even in preparation for the instability that this war that Putin has criminally undertaken without any provocation, murdering people, women and children, people in hospitals, people in schools. Yes, oil prices have gone up because the world market, we don't control it here, the world market was very concerned about this. So although it's $1 since he invaded, I'm convinced that a substantial amount of the increase was caused by the instability that his threat, marshaling troops at the border of Ukraine and Belarus, and from Russia, destabilized the market, no doubt about it. I tell the gentleman again, there is an ability to drill, there's an ability to do research and discover and do the seismic tests. There is that ability now. I don't accept the gentleman's premise that there is a roadblock. The President does not want to expand. You understand that. He said that. You quoted him. He wants to get to alternative energy sources. He wants to save the planet. I share that view with him. But we're going to have fossil fuels in the short term because we won't be able to power our economy or our people for some years to come. Hopefully by 2035 we'll have a substantial reduction, and hopefully by 2050 a very, very substantial reduction, perhaps zero. But in the short term we're going to need a resource that has been a critical resource for the growth of our economy and other economies around the world. So nobody's criticizing those who produce that. At least I say nobody. I'm not criticizing them. But I really believe that we can get more production under present circumstances, and that's what we ought to be doing. I yield.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Clearly, we disagree on many of these items. Drilling in America is the cleanest way to produce oil in the world. If it's going to come from Russia, which I don't want, if it's going to come from any dictator, they actually emit more carbon than if you make it in America. But I want to point out, as the gentleman talked about this magical lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico and why no one bid on it, the reason is because it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. The Biden administration did not move forward with that lease sale. And that's what we're trying to address with these bills.
The Biden just didn't make that decision. The courts made that decision.
But the gentleman was saying it wasn't bid on. The oil companies didn't want to do it. They did. They wanted to invest in America. An environmental group went to block it and got a court to go along with them. And the normal practice is the administration stands up for America and American policy and objects. And the Biden administration refused to challenge it in the courts because they didn't want the lease sale to go forward. And the lease sale did not go forward. That's why no one bid on it, because there was no lease sale. We fixed that with these pieces of legislation we'd like to bring to the floor. But we will continue this discussion. Hopefully we can resolve it. We'll continue pushing for it. And with that, I would yield back.
Wait for them to move.
I entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to reintroduce our Transforming Student Debt to Home Equity Act. Home ownership is a key that opens the door to the middle class for tens of millions of Americans. But today, too many young workers and their families are weighed down